Welcome, everybody. I'm glad to see so many people showed up, especially given this inclement weather. So I'm grateful. My name is John Huth, and I'm a Ventures faculty member here at the Radcliffe Institute, and I help them organize their programming with a particular emphasis in the sciences. So this is the third in a series of public lectures associated with our science theme this year about oceans. So by way of introduction, let me quote Jack London, who wrote, "The acquisition of the knowledge of navigation has a strange effect on the minds of man." And I'll attest to that. And by way of introducing our speaker, I had the good fortune to study in the Marshall Islands with a traditional navigator, a Rimeto, and he tried to teach us the art of wave piloting. And I can't say that I became an expert, but it was a fascinating experience because it was in the process of learning this that I realized there was also a strong cultural connection. You can't separate out navigation from how people lead their lives. And so the strong cultural connection evidently has been part of the tradition of the Polynesian Voyaging Society, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that and the deep cultural roots. Kaleo, we're fortunate to have here. It represents the next generation of navigators in the Polynesian Voyaging Society. He joined in 1998 when he was a student at Kaiser High School in Honolulu and attended the University of Hawaii at Manoa and studied Olelo, which is the Hawaiian language and Hawaiian studies, and he does work also as a conservation biologist. As many of you probably know, but you'll soon learn if you don't, the Hōkūleʻa was on a voyage around the world with both a mission to, I guess, make the longest voyage without instruments, but also as a means of bringing their culture around. And they've made many connections, particularly with in this area with indigenous tribes. I met him for the first time in Woods Hole in July when the Hōkūleʻa was docked there, and we did a radio interview along with Kat Fuller, who was also a navigator at the time, and had some amazing discussions. One of the things that I was amazed at was, although I know that other people do this non-instrument kind of navigation, it was the first time I actually was able to talk to somebody else that did exactly that, and so it was wonderful to compare notes. So on that, I invite Kaleo to come up and honor us with his talk, and after his talk, we'll be able to take some questions. So thank you.
Honua, Hōkūleʻa, ka hoʻokuʻi o Hōkūleʻa. Lihu mālama I ka huʻakai, ina ka hoa wa'alono ka hea aloha. Aloha e. Aloha. That was just our way of introducing myself. Wherever we go with Hōkūleʻa, we do this, we ask permission that we land on these shores, preferably to someone who's been here for thousands of years. So lucky we have Tobias Vanderhoop here in the back from Aquina, Wampanoag here, so mahalo for that. And thank you guys for having me here at this beautiful place. A little bit of snow. I got sent this picture by my girlfriend yesterday of what it looked like at home, and I was going to start with that. But anyway, I'll talk about Hōkūleʻa, kind of this idea of aloha aina and our worldwide voyage that we're undergoing right now. And I'll begin first with what Hōkūleʻa is, who she is, the circumstances at which she was born into and out of, what aloha aina is, and what our current plan is right now. So briefly, aloha aina. Aloha is kind of just a way of introducing ourselves as I just did, but also love, kindness, grace, a way of which you carry yourself ai, food, or that which feeds us. Aina, there being the land or the earth. And aloha aina is something that, that we do as a practice. That means to love ourselves, to love the land, to honor these genealogical connections that we have as indigenous people to the place and all the things that go along with that. So to begin with this mo'oku'ohau, or this genealogy of Hōkūleʻa, so that we can situate ourselves, we'll begin there. We have our story, just like Native peoples around the world, we have our story in Hawaii on how we're genealogically connected to the land. The same gods who gave birth to the land, gave birth to these plants, gave birth to us. So therefore, we're a younger sibling of these things, and it's our responsibility to care for each other as family. Of course, there's this other origin story of us sailing up to Hawaii from the South Pacific. We're not exactly sure of what island, and there's probably multiple islands where we've come from, but we've arrived in Hawaii about 2,500 miles away from Tahiti, the most isolated archipelago in the world, and traveled up there along these ancestral paths, and still hold the same languages and cultures that continue to connect us as people to peoples in Tahiti, to the Marquesas, to Nukuhiva, all the way across to New Zealand, to Rapa Nui, a huge oceanic continent, a huge oceanic country that's a lot bigger than any others. And our genealogies put us in Hawaii, being in Hawaii for about 2,000 years. We see now that anthropologists and archaeologists originally were saying the earliest evidence of Hawaiians in Hawaii was about maybe 1400 AD, and then we see more about 700, and then the most recent one was about 200 AD, so more like science aligning itself with our own genealogies. We are told that we're related to all the South Pacific peoples and come out of Southeast Asia, left there about 7,000 years ago to come into the Pacific and up into Hawaii. So a pretty remarkable thing where 7,000 years ago, people are on canoes and sailing across the ocean, using the stars and the sun to navigate, far before other peoples are beginning their own oceanic explorations. Once we got to Hawaii, we adapted to the land. We learned from the land through all these processes of aloha aina, and we're able to get from maybe, if you follow the stories of us landing in Hawaii from the South Pacific, that's just a canoe or a few canoes of people, to at our height about 800,000 people in Hawaii at the time of Cook's arrival in 1778. Of course, in 1778, when Cook arrived and he had those estimates of the amount of people that was in Hawaii, immediately after that, because of introduced diseases like everywhere else where Native peoples came into contact with Westerners, introduced diseases, decimated the population from 800,000 to 40,000. So about 95% of all Hawaiians passed away. And with them was not just the passing of the people, but all the knowledge of the culture, of the language, the practices, all gone in a matter of a few decades. Because of the decline of the population and the survivors who made it through the introduced foreign diseases, what was to follow was assimilation and colonization, right, into American society. It was a pretty common thing in Hawaii and amongst other Native peoples around the world, where then we begin to feel ashamed of who we are, who our ancestors were, the culture, the language, and this idea that the only way to move forward in this world is to assimilate into the American society. And so out of love for their kids and their grandkids, they weren't, the Hawaiian people weren't passing on the language and the culture. And so with that, a lot of it, even more so, died out. And what came in was this feeling of shame of who we were. It wasn't until these three extraordinary guys, it was Ben Finney, Tommy Holmes, and Herb Kane, who had this radical imagination of creating a canoe and sailing along these ancestral routes, guided by the stars and the swells and the sun. At the time, the dominant theories of how peoples got into the Pacific were being put forth by people like Thor Heyerdahl, right, in Kon-Tiki, where they came from South America, jumped on some raft that they couldn't steer, and set off by the currents and the winds and somehow landed on the island. And that's what was accepted, right? But we know as Pacific peoples that we're all related. Like as I was saying, in Tahiti, still to today, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we pretty much have the same language. In the Marquesas, Nukuhiva, over 50% of our words are exactly the same. We know that through our stories, we're able to go to places and come back. Say we went from Tahiti to Hawaii. Maybe we didn't know exactly where Hawaii was, but we always knew where we're coming from and where we were in the world to get back to Tahiti and then do multiple routes. However, the theory being put forth, nope, they just went with the winds and the currents and the waves, and wherever they crash landed like Kon-Tiki did, that's how they got there. But these three guys said, you know what, we're going to build this canoe, and we're going to navigate by the stars and the swells and do it in a traditional way. Pretty amazing idea, but they found money, they found funding, they built and launched the canoe, Hōkūleʻa, in 1975. Majority of people thought this project would fail. Hawaiians and non-Hawaiians, of course this isn't going to work, right? It's crazy to think about today. Like, you're going to do what? Like, you're going to jump on a canoe and just go out into the middle of the ocean to the nearest landfall 2,500 miles away with no GPS today or no compass, no nothing. You're just going to go. And they're like, yep, we're going. So they built the canoe, and they needed a navigator. They found this guy, Maupiailu, from the island of Satawal in Micronesia. He's from this tiny little island where, by necessity, they have to go out and navigate to other islands, to other reefs, to gather food, to feed their people. It's not just part of a cultural practice, something they do for fun. They have to do it to sustain their people. The island he's from is only 1.5 miles long and about a mile wide. So a tiny, tiny little island. Tallest thing on it is a coconut tree. So you sail away from land, it's hard to come back unless you know how to read the ocean and nature's clues. So they found this guy. He was the connection to our collective oceanic ancestral knowledge of how to do this navigation. What was pretty incredible about him is the island he's from, with their culture, it was against their own practices to teach someone outside of their family. But he agreed to teach us, to teach Hawaiians thousands of miles away, not part of his direct family, but part of this collective oceanic family, and he agreed to do it. So he came to Hawaii, they had the navigator, they had their canoe, and they set off for Tahiti. This is the picture from one of their first legs. Mau, as the navigator, his island is north of the equator. And so he agreed to navigate to Tahiti, which is 17 degrees south of the equator. So navigate in oceans he's never been in, with stars he's never seen, on the longest voyage he's ever done. Typically, he just went out for a few hundred miles, and all in the northern hemisphere, which is really significant because you have the North Star, which always can tell you your direction. Once you go below the equator, there's no North Star. So there's a whole new set of stars. And he agreed to do it. And they're like, yeah, let's go. And they're like, OK. They jumped on. And he said, like, what? And he's like, well, if I have courage, it's because I have faith in the teachings of my ancestors. When asked, like, how? Like, what? And that's what he said. So 30 days later, they got to Tahiti. And about 50% of the entire island came out. They estimate about over 17,000 Tahitians came to the beach to see Hōkūleʻa arrive. And then we often ask, why would this much people come out to see this canoe? It's clear if you understand our connections to Tahitians as Hawaiians. We have the same language, we have the same culture, we have the same story. We had stories of our ancestors sailing out in the ocean, navigating by stars, and so did they. But we stopped doing it. Part of it is because of the collapse of 95% of the population. And they stopped doing it as well. There's similar, similar problems going on there with Cook landed in Tahiti first before he came to Hawaii. And then now they're colonized by the French. So they have similar issues happening there. And they're not navigating. So when Hōkūleʻa landed there, it was an affirmation and a confirmation that the stories of our ancestors are true, that they're able to do it, and we're able to do it again today. After not doing it for maybe a couple hundred years, here's this canoe that just sailed from Hawaii and landing on our shores. And so they came, and it kind of sparked this revitalization of their own culture in Tahiti. And the same thing happened when they got to Hawaii too. There's a similar response where we began to feel proud of who we were and what we're able to do, and no longer being ashamed of where our ancestors, but look what they did, and look what we can still do. Despite everything that happened, we can still jump on a canoe, sail away with stars and sun that are, knowing how to read them and do it to today. So when they landed back in Hawaii, it's characterized now as like a Hawaiian Renaissance began, kind of ignite this Hawaiian Renaissance. But I think deeper than that is more of a, reclamation of our own identity. Not only were we beginning to sail in this manner, but all these different aspects of our culture began to come back. We had hula is coming back again. Our music that was once in the early 70s, it was characterized as in the death throes, that Hawaiian music was going to be no more. And then Hawaiian music started coming back, and just last night was the Grammys, and a Hawaiian guy won a Grammy for his Hawaiian music. That was pretty much all in the Hawaiian language that he wrote. The Hawaiian language came back. Hawaiian language was also characterized as a dying out language. No one was speaking the language anymore. Those who understood it weren't teaching it to their kids for the love of their kids. That's their mindset at the time. For the love of their kids, they're not going to teach them the language. But now, language is starting to come back. About 6 years after Hōkūleʻa arrived back home after this first voyage, the first doors, the first school opened up of the Hawaiian Immersion School. So it was an elementary school, kindergarten, and each year as the kids grew older, they added a new grade level all the way until they graduated, and the first graduating class was in 1999. And now you can get a graduate degree in the study of Hawaiian language. People are writing their dissertations in fields other than Hawaiian, but in Hawaiian. There's a guy who just got he did his MA in English, and he wrote his paper in Hawaiian. Yeah. Guys in the history department, the geography department, all these other departments are now beginning to use language in these ways in these other departments in university settings. So all kind of a result from these original guys from Hōkūleʻa and what they're able to do for the people. Hōkūleʻa was originally built for one voyage in 1976 to Tahiti and back. And since then, and because of the response that happened in Tahiti and at home, now has been on all these other voyages, not just those ones. So since 76 till now, we're still on this worldwide voyage here.
The same canoe?
The same canoe, so it's the same one that's traveling right now. We went to all of these places before the worldwide voyage even began. So since then, we added on, a whole bunch of other countries, and we'll show a slide later on that shows our route. Because of the success that Hōkūleʻa has had, now there's a whole bunch of voyaging canoes around the South Pacific that there wasn't any before. Of course, all of our ancestors had them, but everyone stopped sailing until Hōkūleʻa came around. And now, we're 41 years into it, and there's probably close to 20 canoes sailing around the Pacific, around Hawaii, Tahiti, Samoa, Tonga, Aotearoa. Question? Good question, and I'll get to that. Sorry.
Are those solar panels on the bottom?
Yeah, solar panels. I'll talk about that too. Yeah. So along with this, this bringing back of traditional navigation comes everything else seemed to come back with it. I mean, we talked about the language, hula, music, but everything that just even goes alongside with the building of a canoe. Right, so not solar panels, but the making of the sails, making of the traditional materials that go onto the canoe, the songs, the stories that go along with them, and our navigational system. So we see, like, even in Tahiti, this is their star map that they use, and it was put together by a Tahitian man, Jean-Claude Teri'iero about their navigational systems and how they use the stars to navigate their canoes, and how they're trying to bring all this knowledge back into practice today on their canoe. As we were in Tonga, we met with these guys, these Tongans, who talk about their navigational systems that they're bringing back themselves too. And so we have all of these stories, and all of these responses from around the world of what this little dream was from these three guys with this radical imagination to sail around the world, and this little pebble that was thrown into the pond, that the ripple effects are still being seen today. With all the success Hōkūleʻa has with bringing back these ancestral knowledges, we're now going around the world and talking about, mālama honua, or caring for our earth. We're trying to highlight these aloha aina type actions, as I talked about earlier, these actions that are going for caring for ourselves and caring for our communities and for the land and for the oceans that were in it. So every voyage had its clear vision, its clear purpose. One of them was the voyage of rediscovery, kind of after Captain Cook's voyage of discovery. They went on this voyage of rediscovery to rediscover ourselves. One of them was called For the Children. This one is about caring for the earth and trying to highlight those things. Out of our some of our voyages, we have a saying, he moku he va'a, or he va'a he moku, means a canoe is an island, or an island is a canoe. As we're going out and we're this tiny little canoe in the middle of the ocean, everything we have is all we have, and all we have is everything we have. We can't get more fresh water unless it rains. We eat all our food, we don't got any more food. We rip our sails and we don't have more sails, and we've ripped our sails. And it's the same for an island in the middle of the ocean. Once we consume all of our resources and once those are gone, then those things are gone unless we start shipping it in, which is a whole nother issue. So we view the canoe as an island, that if we can care for our canoe and the resources that are on our canoe, then we should be able to care for our communities and the resources in our communities on our island and on our world. Extrapolating to that, he honua he va'a. The earth is like an island. We can't just get off of the earth, just like we can't get off the canoe in the middle of the ocean. The worldwide voyage was original visions came from these two guys, Pinky Thompson, the father of Nainoa Thompson, the president of the Polynesian Voyaging Society, and Lacey Veach, Punahou graduate from Hawaii, and an astronaut. And we'll talk about him a little later. Oftentimes when we go around, we're talking to communities, we're talking about the ocean as it's the greatest environmental issue of this time. As what we're talking about, and try to let people know the importance of the ocean, that over 50% of our oxygen that we breathe comes from the ocean. So not even just talking about the resources like fish that we eat, but just to breathe comes from the ocean. And if we don't protect the ocean, we can't even breathe. Our sail plan for around the world. So we started in Hawaii, sailed down to Tahiti, and sailed west through Samoa, Tonga, Aotearoa, and around Australia, around the Cape of Good Hope, all the way up here. We just went through the Panama Canal recently. They just left the Galapagos like 2 or 3 days ago, and now they're on their way down to Rapa Nui and back into ancestral routes, ancestral homelands. Before we left on the worldwide voyage, we first went around to our own communities and talked to our people to make sure we have the support of them. We went to over 50 different communities in Hawaii and reached over 10,000 school kids that came down to see the canoes, to learn about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And once we get back, it's like, this is why we went, and we're going to go around all of Hawaii again and say, this is why we went, and this is, hopefully there's a difference in what we, in Hawaii and around the world. When we left Hawaii, this was in Hilo. That's what the departure looked like. Lots of people, lots of support for this worldwide voyage. And as we were on the voyage, iPad, right? Not traditional. Just in case you're thinking it's totally just traditional. We partner with Google, National Geographic, and all these other guys to stay connected to our kids back home in Hawaii and around the world. So we have these Google Hangouts, which are kind of like Skype. And anyone could log in and ask questions and participate in conversations with people while they're on the canoe. You can see Hōkūleʻa's in the background. So these guys are on our sister canoe, Hikianalia. So we had 2 canoes originally when we left. And now just Hōkūleʻa is traveling around the world. But one of the good things about these updates that we're doing under these Google Hangouts is when you go on the canoe, there's just 12 of us on there. It's such a small space, 62 feet long, 18 feet wide. But when we can do these updates, we can literally engage with the world as we're doing it. This guy here is Taieva'u from Fatuhiva in the Marquesas, and this is on our leg down from Hawaii to Tahiti, about somewhere around the equator. The opposite view, so kids in the classroom participating in this. This is Kat Fuller, who John mentioned earlier. She's doing an update. Actually, she's in the port in Samoa and talking to her kids back home in Hawaii. Lots of questions these guys have. And you can still do this. So you guys can go visit our website, www.hōkūleʻa.com, and still do this. Ask questions and talk to the crew while they're in the middle of the ocean. And wherever we land, our focus really is on the kids, that if we can reach the kids and instill with them the pride of their ancestors, and then talk to them about the environment and the importance of protecting it, that we feel that's the best way to make change is really from the kids up. So we focus on that. This was in Tahiti, but this could be anywhere. This could be Hawaii. This could be Hawaiian kids. The upper picture is in Samoa. The lower picture is in Tonga. The left is in the Cook Islands. So, really engaging with our communities and specifically targeting the kids. I mentioned before that we started in our own communities in Hawaii, and now we broadening out to Polynesia, which is still our own communities, right? We're still the same people, all the way to Aotearoa, New Zealand, before we went west and went to places where we traditionally didn't go, like Australia, the Sydney Opera House. As I was saying, wherever we land, we try to begin first with introducing ourselves, who we are, where we've come from, and why we're there. So oftentimes we have people who support us in that way. If it's not just us on the canoe, but we have members from our community come down to make sure we're honoring the people and the place the correct way. And then continue to west to Bali, around South Africa. I think this might have been in Mozambique. And then Cape Town. Just to talk a little bit about what one of our legs look like, and to show what our sail plan looks like. This was just to focus on this one, our trip from Cape Town to Brazil. What a typical sail plan looks like these days, Google Earth. Of course, not a traditional way of looking at it, but Hōkūleʻa and our canoes have always been blending modern technology with traditional practices. So even our canoe itself, Hōkūleʻa, because the primary focus is about navigation and not about the canoe building itself. The canoe is made out of fiberglass and plywood, but the entire thing is held together by 5 miles of rope using traditional lashing techniques. So it's these traditional practices that hold these modern hulls together. I talked about Lacey Veach a little earlier. He was an astronaut from Hawaii. In 1992, while Hōkūleʻa was sailing from Hawaii to Tahiti, navigating with the stars, Lacey Veach was on the space shuttle orbiting the Earth, and they talked to each other from the canoe to the space shuttle. And so definitely, blending the two modern technologies with traditional. So you saw the solar panels that were on there that go to power things like our running lights and our Google Hangouts and our iPad updates. But these modern things that aid us in getting our word out about what we're doing. So this is what our sail plan looked like going all the way to Brazil across the Atlantic, 4,000 miles, 35 days. And so we knew going across the Atlantic was going to be cold. We're not used to that, right? We're used to more like that picture. But we end up in places like here in Boston or in Cape Town and start off like that and end up like that in Brazil. But we were expecting that, of course. What we didn't expect was fog. We don't really have fog in Hawaii. So as we're going off the coast of Namibia, we encountered a lot of fog, which you'd imagine we're navigating by the stars and the sun. How do you even see through that? Yeah. You can see that's our escort boat in the background. It's only about a quarter mile away, but hard to see. Easy for you guys to picture, but for us back home, they're like, what is fog? And we're like, that's our escort boat a quarter mile away. And people, we're not used to it.
So you don't have a wood fog?
I'm sorry?
You don't have a Hawaiian wood fog?
We have mountain fog, which is mostly just like rain, but we don't have fog on the ocean like this. Yeah, we just have a generic term for mountain fog. Yeah, and so we set off from off the coast of Namibia from Cape Town and went to this tiny little island called St. Helena. It's a place where they put Napoleon Bonaparte. You guys might recognize that place from there after they exiled them there. And we found this tiny little island, 1,200 miles away off the coast of Namibia, which is a pretty extraordinary event because just on paper, this is one tiny little target surrounded by nothing but ocean. If we're navigating from Tahiti to Hawaii, you're sailing up to, the most isolated archipelago in the world, but we have really tall mountains, like 13,000 foot tall mountains, and eight of those islands. Over here is one island, 2,600 feet high in elevation, and the closest land to it is 700 miles away, which is an even smaller island. So even just trying to find this island on paper is really difficult. And then going through the fog that we had made it extremely difficult. But along the way, we see our ocean relatives, the Eva birds, these dolphins here. And then, as I was talking about with Aloha Aina, part of it, like Mao was saying, if I have faith, it's because, if I have courage, it's because I have faith in the teachings of my ancestors. Part of what Aloha Aina is that we talk about is also, having the strength and the courage to rely on things like this that may just look like a dolphin or may just look like a bird, but try to understand that there could be a message in there that's helping guide us to these islands. As we're sailing towards St. Helena, because of the weather we were having, we couldn't go straight there. We knew our course was to the north of us. We knew we were south of the island, but we couldn't sail there. So we decided we were going to tack our canoe. We're going to turn into the wind and go further up north. And we came up with this whole plan on what we were going to do based off of the strength of the wind, the speed of our canoe, that if we tacked into the wind and we went up north for all night long and the sun came up and we turned back to the west, that we would find the island should be in front of us. Sounded like a pretty good plan. But as we're going north, the wind kind of died and was moving around as it has the entire trip, constantly swirling around us. So we didn't make the mileage that we thought we would have. So when the sun came up, we were trying to decide, do we still turn to the west or do we keep going north? And as we were thinking about that, this lightning bolt came down just like a movie, straight in front of the canoe from the clouds to the ocean. And a relatively clear sky day, like blue skies, and all of a sudden this lightning bolt, boom, right down to the ocean. And again, we don't see these kinds of lightning in Hawaii normally. Our lightning goes across the sky. And so we saw this one was like straight in front of the canoe. We're like, okay, maybe we should turn. If we go straight, we're going to go into this lightning storm. Yeah, we should turn. And as soon as we turned, we saw those guys earlier on in the trip. But as soon as we turned, it was like a Disney movie. Like we're going straight towards the island, and all of a sudden there's birds flying out of nowhere, like tons of birds. There's fish jumping everywhere. There's dolphins everywhere. It's like Walt Disney like drew in all of these things for us to find the island. The island was right in front of the canoe. And another sign that we use, that we see as a ho'elona, or a sign that our kupuna are still with us, is rainbows like this. Punohu'ula, they're from long time ago till now. It's seen as an ancestral sign that something good is happening. You're going along the right path. You're on the right course. And after seeing this one, we found this other island, Fernando de Noronha. It's only about 7 square miles big, 200 miles off the coast of Brazil, and we landed on this island. That island. Another story from that trip. There was a guy, this longtime crew member named Mel Paoa, and he was an EMT on a small island called Molokai. And he accidentally cut off his finger one day. And there's like 30 different stories of how he did it. And people say they're all true. But he wore it as his necklace. Yeah, and he always made jokes about his finger. And it was just a bone, so you wouldn't even know it was his finger unless he told you. And instead of having a nub, he cut it all away. So from his middle finger, it looked like that. It looked like nothing. Except if you count his fingers, you're like, there's only 4 there. And so when he'd tell us he needed something, because he was a cook, he'd be like, hey, I need 5 onions. But he'd go like this. And, 5. He's missing a finger. So he's always joking around about this finger. And unfortunately, he passed away about a year ago. And he was supposed to be with us on this leg across the Atlantic. But because he wasn't there, his son came with us. And one night we seen these clouds that looked like this. And it kind of looked like a hand, right? It's just the moon, lit by the moon, and these clouds. And we're like, oh, it's Uncle Mel. He's waving at us. And then someone's like, wait a minute, it's his birthday today. And we're like, what? It is Uncle Mel. And then we're like, yeah, but we're like, yeah, but it's just clouds, but whatever. And then the next morning, right after the sun came up, this bird came. And you can see he landed on his hands. And we often get birds that land on the canoe, and they're really pretty awkward when they come in. And everything on the canoe is rocking back and forth, the lines and everything. So when they're flying to the canoe, they kind of circle around a couple of times, and they're plan their approach, and then they get close, and then they fly backwards and look at it again, and they try a couple of times, and sometimes they clumsily fall off. And it's pretty normal to see that. But this morning, this bird came, and this guy put up his hand. It came right on his hand. Boom, it landed on his hand as if it was his pet bird. And we're 400 miles away from the nearest land. So another amazing thing is this bird is normally close to land. It's normally within 50 miles from land, but we're 400 miles away from this small island right after St. Helena. And this bird came and landed on his hand as if he's been doing it for hundreds of years. And this guy is the son of the guy, Uncle Mel, who passed away. And it's just all of a sudden, he's like, hey, so what did you do? He's like, I just looked at the bird, and the bird looked at me. I put up my hand, and the bird landed on my hand. I'm like, oh, my goodness. And he just hung out there for a couple minutes. So we're like, it is Uncle Mel, again, his son, on his birthday after the clouds. And then because he was the cook, that same day, we caught this big fish, this big mahi-mahi. And going across the Atlantic, I'm not sure why, but we were catching fish maybe once every 5 or 6 days. Whenever we sail, we drag hand lines. And when we're going in the Pacific, we catch a fish probably every day on average. And of course, everyone wants to eat fish, right? It's a fresh source of protein. Everything else is kind of canned, dehydrated, things like that. So we always want to eat fish. So we always fish every day. Going across the Atlantic, like I was saying, one fish every 5 or 6 days. But on this day, we caught this big fish, this big mahi-mahi. And because Uncle Mel was the cook, we're like, it is Uncle Mel again. We got this big fish. And it was funny because as we were crossing the Tasman Sea, there's Eddie Aikau, who was a crew member who passed away as well. On his birthday, we caught this big fish. And we're like, it's from Eddie Aikau. Just because his name, Aikau, means to place food in your mouth. And so he was providing us with this food. So we were thinking back about that trip. And then now Uncle Mel, as the cook, had this fish that we caught and was able to feed the crew. So, just thinking about, this carrying on his kuleana, his responsibility to watch over us and provide us with food. So, pretty cool story, right, about Uncle Mel. But for us, it was kind of like an affirmation that wherever we go, whether we're in the Pacific traveling in ancestral waters or not, or in the Atlantic where we've never been, potentially, that we still have ancestors traveling with us on board these aboard the canoes and making sure we're all good. Speaking of Uncle Mel, that's him. Looks kind of funny on this here. And so to talk about Aloha Aina again is to recognize our kupuna, our ancestors in these different forms. From Brazil, I got off. Some other guys got on, sailed it up the coast to Cuba, to the Virgin Islands, to Cuba, up to Florida, to DC, to New York, and was greeted by people like this guy. Ban Ki-moon is the Secretary General for the UN, and others who've come to greet the canoe. Yeah, we knew DC and New York were going to be big ports for us to land at. Of course, they're big cities, big opportunities to get our message, our word out about what we're doing and why we're doing it. But to be honest, when after I sailed across the Atlantic, I was like, okay, like I'll be okay if I don't sail along the east coast of America. It's a relatively easy sail. You kind of go from port to port, give other people an opportunity to sail. Maybe I'll jump on again in the Pacific. But then I was asked to sail again with my mentor, Bruce Blankenfeld, who said, hey, come sail with us along the east coast. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'll be there. And of course, I wasn't here for these ones, but we knew, we kind of knew what it was going to be like with these ports that we're landing at. But I went with them on this leg, and the first place we landed was the Pequot Museum, the Meshentucket Pequots. And it was an amazing leg of the worldwide voyage, one that I wasn't really sure I really wanted to be a part of, but in the end turned out to be the most rewarding leg probably I've ever done. Sailing across the Atlantic was an amazing leg as well. Sailing from Hawaii to Tahiti, that was awesome. But most of the time, it's just us and the ocean and fish and birds. But along the coast, you meet with people from the different communities who are doing these similar types of Aloha Aina type actions within their own peoples, within their own communities. And we get to learn about them and the similarities between us and the people we meet with. And it's one of the things we find, too, that no matter where we go around the world, that we find there's way more similarities between us than there are differences, whether in South Africa or with the Meshentucket Pequot people in Mystic. From there, on this leg, we went to this place, Martha's Vineyard. There's a guy over there in the front, Tobias. He's in the back now. He came with us. He was one of our hosts for the Quina Wampanoag people, and Sam Lowe is in the back who was there. Sam Lowe is actually Nainoa Thompson's cousin, who's the president of the Polynesian Voyaging Society. So from what I hear, and they can correct me if I'm wrong, but Nainoa asked Uncle Sam, hey, we want to go to Martha's Vineyard. So he said, okay, let me go try ask Tobias. He's from the Quina Wampanoag people. Just make sure it's okay with them. If you're asking permission from me, you should really ask permission from them. So he asked Tobias and the Wampanoag people if we could land there in Martha's Vineyard. And he sent us down a wampum as a traditional request for us to visit them. About 3 months later, Uncle Sam asked him, hey, so how's it going? Did you send the request? Are you going to receive them? Did they ask permission? Did you agree? And he said, oh, yeah, we're working on it. But not only did they just send us a request by wampum to come and visit their place and agreed for us to visit, but they then built this canoe, this mashoon, which what we're told was the first one that was built in their territory in like 300 years. and that it was built because Hōkūleʻa was coming to their homelands in an ancestral vessel and asking permission to land on their shores. So they didn't just agree, but they built this amazing canoe. And they launched it for when Hōkūleʻa came in. So this is actually when we're pulling in. These guys are out there paddling. So we see this amazing gift that was given to us, first by those three guys with their radical imagination of building the canoe, but then by that navigator from Sarawal, Maupiailu, who agreed to teach us, people outside of his direct family. And we see the response that we get around the world. As I was saying, even in the Pacific, there wasn't people sailing around on these double-hull canoes around Polynesia like we have been. But now there's, like I was saying, about 20 canoes. When we first went to New Zealand, to Aotearoa in 1985, that began their canoe culture revitalization as well. They started building canoes, and they sail all around the Pacific, the South Pacific, using their ancestral techniques as well. And we still see it when we land in places like Martha's Vineyard with the Aquinnah Wampanoag people. Just this last summer, this happened. So we see this incredible gift that was given to us and the ripple effect it has and has had within Hawaii, within Polynesia, and around the world. So we also, we often ask, like, so now that you can navigate, like, so now what? That's cool, but what does it all mean? And one of the key teachings of Maupiailu was that the navigator gained its prestige, his power, not just by their ability on the ocean, but how they navigate their communities, how they care for the communities, and how they aloha aina, really, how they love the land and love their people. So when we're creating these canoes and doing this navigation, it's more really about the now what? Now what are we going to do about it? And we see, the effects that the canoe has had all around the world. Again, once we got there to Martha's Vineyard, Uncle Snake, one of our longtime crew members, greeting John, the Aquinnah Wampanoag people in our traditional way. What's amazing too about our arrivals is, we often privilege the native people from the area, which are usually the guys who are marginalized, right? When we go to places, we first meet with the Oiwi, with the natives from that place, and ask them permission to land, to see it's okay with them, because we know that we're not just traveling with us 12 that's on the canoe, but we're traveling with all of our kupuna, all of our ancestors who's also traveling with us to a place where their ancestors have been for thousands of years. So we come to places like this, and we ask permission, and it's not just for us, but it's for the people who is there as well. This day there was people coming up to us and saying, I've lived here on Martha's Vineyard for 40 years, and I never knew there was native people here. We're like, well, that's mostly on you. Why didn't you know that? But we see that same, effect everywhere we go along the East Coast. That it's kind of helps to highlight, the native people who's in the area, who's been there for thousands of years. When we continued on our voyage, we went up here to Woods Hole. It was part of the Mashpee Wampanoags, part of their grand entry in their powwow, which is huge for us and for them, from what we hear. But just to have our flag being flown at their powwow, it's really a recognition of one indigenous people to another, and what we need more of. And then as we left, they got in their canoes, and they saw us leave and paddled out and did some songs as we were leaving. Then we continued on the coast, got here to Boston. You see all these people. I think it's Fen Pier. Is that right? Yeah, Fen Pier. Hosted in part by Moana. It's in the back. Hunap and the Massachusetts people. So this is we got there. Hunap students. And then when we leave places, we try to bring people with us from those communities. So it's not just us, but traveling with them. So this is a guy from the Massachusetts tribe who was one of our hosts there in Boston. And he was saying, this is the first time someone's ever asked permission to land on our shores. And we're like, oh, there's a lot behind that statement. There's a lot behind it, but, we're like, this what we try to do everywhere we go, as I started tonight. This is who we are, why we're here, and, let's learn together, let's grow together. And then continued on our leg up to Maine, where we were hosted by the Wabanaki in their birch bark canoes. So as I was saying, one of the most rewarding legs that I've ever done was coming here to the East Coast and meeting with all of these indigenous peoples on their lands and learning about them, their stories, and the way the different aloha aina actions they do. While we're traveling, we're also doing science at sea, whether we're going along the coast or going across oceans. So a lot of words on top there instead of pictures, but most of it is just based upon teaching the importance of the oceans, inspiring youth to become informed citizens and leaders for a more sustainable future, and using their canoe to do these science experiments. For one, when we catch fish, we log, species, sex, size, eggs. We take a fin clip to look at DNA samples. We look at the gut contents. Not in there. I think there was 3 fish that we caught that had plastic inside their stomach. And I think they're all in the Atlantic, those 3 fish that we caught. But then what does that tell us? What does that tell our kids? And how do you use this in the future? While we're going, we do some plankton tows with a really fine net. We scoop up what we can when we're going really slow. We look at it under microscopes, try to identify what we're seeing, and then sending it out and creating cards out to the different communities we're going to. So whether we're in the middle of the ocean doing a plankton tow, or we're just standing on the dock and just walking back and forth the dock with a net, we try to do that to look under the microscope to see, what are these microscopic organisms that are here, because it's really the foundation of what the little fish are eating, and then the bigger fish and the bigger fish and all that good stuff that we know of. And then, we did marine debris tows, beach cleanups, and most of it is just educational outreach that we try to do. We do water quality samples while we're going. So this was on our other canoe, Hīkēʻanalia, doing the data collection to see, what we're seeing out there. And then I know there's going to be some questions, so I saved some time for that. But ways that you can join the voyage that's still ongoing right now. Hōkūleʻa, it's actually .com now instead of .org. Facebook, Twitter, there's Instagram. Hōkūleʻa, as I said, Hōkūleʻa just left the Galapagos on their way to Rapa Nui, so you could log on and see. I think they already have photos and videos from their leg going to Rapa Nui. There's a tracker on board that you can live track where the canoe is right now, see the proposed sail plan from, just on paper before we go, and then their actual sailing route. And overlaid with the wind, it's pretty awesome. You can see what direction they're sailing, what direction the wind's coming from. So if you see them going like way off their course, like, why are they going that way? It's like, oh, maybe it's, it's the wind that they can't sail the direction they want to go. That was it. But there's a few other slides in there, just in case there's questions that I need help explaining.
Thank you. So we have time for some questions. Do we have the microphone? Are we passing the microphone around? So if you have questions, raise your hand, and we'll pass the mic around, and you can call on the people.
Sure. Yeah. Let's start in the front.
So where did the design of the boat come from? Written record, pictures?
Yeah, good question.
And how old was it?
Good question.
The design.
Yeah, so when we look at the canoe, it looks kind of like a catamaran, right? What people know of a catamaran today. So people often call it a catamaran. not knowing that a catamaran was actually designed off of our canoes. But the design came from one of the founders, who was Herb Kane. In the beginning, I showed there was 3 founders. He's an artist and an anthropologist, I think. So he'd done a lot of research on canoes and canoe designs and what they look like in the South Pacific and what our canoes look like in Hawaii. And he kind of came up with the design based off of that. So the canoe that's sailing today, right now, is the same exact canoe that was sailing in the 1970s. Yeah.
You introduced us to the man who came to navigate. And could you just talk a little bit about how he managed to do that? What were the things that he used? What did you learn from that?
So I guess I didn't talk too much about that. But our navigational system is based mostly off of the movements of the stars, the sun, the swells, birds, things like that. So when we're navigating, people like Maupiailu, who is like the master, mostly use swells. So we look at the sun rising. We know where the sun's going to rise, right, based off of the time of the year. Look at the rise and fall of the canoe based off of the swells. So easy way to explain it is if you're going north and there's a north swell, the front of the canoe goes up first and then the back of the canoe. And if now the side is going up first, you know you're way off course. So the main thing he uses is swells. So as the sun is coming up, you orient the canoe based off of the direction of the sun and where you want to go. Feel the rise and fall of the canoe and sail like that all day until the sun's going down, and then you look at it again. Adjust your course if you need to, confirm if you're on course or not, and then sail like that all through the night until the sun comes up again. At nighttime, the stars help with, especially with determining your latitude. There's no way to tell our longitude, but just latitude. So for guys like Maupiailu, of course, he uses the stars to orient the canoe, but he's so good at reading the ocean swells that he uses the swells. And you might be wondering, how do you use the swells? Like I was saying, there's the dominant swells that come from places like in Hawaii, the north for us. That's what creates our huge swells, our huge North Shore waves that people surf on, is from storms that are generated up in the Alaska area. And so they travel across the ocean hundreds, thousands of miles, and they don't change direction until they hit land or they dissipate. You know, it's like if you dropped a rock, a pebble in a pond, once the swells go out, they don't change directions unless they hit land. And so part of reading the swells is being able to decipher what's a swell coming from hundreds, thousands of miles away versus a swell that's created by a locally generated storm that changes with the wind. And then there's birds too. I think there's a picture of a bird, that bird in particular. We call it a manuaku. It's also called a fairy tern or a white tern, but they typically have to go to land every day. Whereas other birds are pelagic, they can spend years out on the ocean without ever going to land. This bird goes to land every day. And so he can fly out about 200 miles out to sea and then back. So the more birds you see, the closer you are. So when you're looking for a tiny little island, seeing this bird puts you at least within a 200-mile distance from the land. Yeah.
Hi. So I've always been curious, what did ancient voyagers do about fresh water? Did they use coconuts? How did they?
You know, that's a good question too, because right now we carry them in plastic jugs, right? But yeah, I'm sure they had the carrying containers that were made out of wood, but also coconuts, as you're saying. It's hard to take water, for one, just to contain it within their containers, but also because it's really heavy. So there's stories of Pacific Island people being able to drink brackish water. But yeah, good question.
Did the wind direction change a lot, and then that have an effect on the navigation? And also, what were the range of wind speeds and stuff? Did you run into storms? How does the boat handle in heavy weather?
Yeah. So it's really stable. because it's a double-hulled canoe, right? The stability is why they create catamarans, off of our canoes. So it's in rough weather, it's okay, it handles fine. The roughest weather we went through was going across the Tasman Sea from New Zealand to Australia. And it was probably 20 to 30 foot seas for about 3 days. And total overcast. So we couldn't see the sun or the stars. But the swells, as I was saying, is a good indicator of what direction you're going. So even though we had big seas, it was coming from behind us. So we're surfing down these big waves. And we had really good surfers on board. One of our crew members is also a world champion surfer. And so he was really happy catching all these waves. Whereas others were hanging on, but the direction of the swells didn't change, and that wind direction, so we can also use that to guide the canoe where we can't use the sun and the stars. Going across the Atlantic, the wind was constantly changing, so that made it extremely difficult, not being able to rely on that. Yeah.
I guess you like fiberglass and Google and electric lights, and what do you think specifically is good about so-called American culture and what is bad about American culture, and how far back do you want to go in ancestral ways to balancing the two, and what does that mean specifically for recommendations about conservation? I know you want to save the world, we all do, but I haven't heard any policy recommendations, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but just something to play with.
Yeah, that's it's a big question. But, Hōkūleʻa was originally formed, the Polynesian Voyaging Society was to kind of debunk Thor Heyerdahl in a way, but also to reclaim this knowledge for ourselves. But as I was saying, we always use, modern materials as well to do it. Going along with this navigation, now that we can do it, became okay, we have this knowledge of being able to navigate, but we're still using a fiberglass canoe. Why don't we build a traditional canoe? And so that was a whole nother project where we tried to find logs that were big enough in our forest to build these canoes, but unfortunately there's introduced pests that are kind of decimating our forest. But there were stories of logs drifting in from the Pacific Northwest. And so we got logs donated by the Athabascans and or the Tlinkits, and they donated logs that we created a canoe. So we're constantly trying to get back to as much traditional ways as possible, and we're seeing it happen till today. We see that before the canoe was built, there was this major decline of culture, of language, of pride of who we were. But since then, we're bringing back all these different aspects, which now is a canoe with Hawaii loa. But also, what about the ropes that were used to lash the canoe together? So, for us, we're trying to get back to as traditional as we can, and it's happening. But the more traditional, the more sustainable as well, right? In Hawaii, as we're saying, there was 800,000 people at the time of Cook, all just living off of the land. Everything that was needed came from those islands. Now there's 1.4 million in Hawaii, but over 95% of everything is being shipped in. So getting back to a traditional culture is also getting back to its sustainability. Yeah. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but.
I was fascinated with the Tahitian star chart that you flashed by. And some of the constellations that are on that chart looked like Western constellations. Could you comment on how the Polynesian culture has projected its mythology into the sky, and tell us something about the same star patterns that we might know and call Orion and Hercules? Perhaps the Polynesians describe them completely differently. Yeah,
it's just interesting question, and a question we get often. Because we see, what are not traditional constellations of what you would think. You'd see Orion, and you wouldn't think that's Tahitian. But it's the same sky that Tahitians are looking at, that Hawaiians are looking at. So looking at it through a Greek language or an Arabic language doesn't make it not traditional. It just means that's the language you're viewing it as. Orion, for example, that you brought up, one way we see it is the constellation of Wākea. And Wākea is one of our primary gods, the one responsible for the creation of the Hawaiian universe. People often think that Wākea is just a Hawaiian name put on a Greek constellation. But looking at this constellation, Wākea, we can identify it as a cultural thing because everything is tied within our system, our navigational system, and our world view to this man Wākea. So, for example, the equator, whether it's a celestial equator or the earthly equator, is the Piko o Wākea, we call it. It's the center of Wākea. Piko would be like your umbilical cord, is one of your picos of your body. So the Piko o Wākea is the center of the world, the center of the celestial world. And it also, if you look at Orion or Wākea, he rises directly in the east and sets directly in the west. The middle of Orion is Orion's belt, which is identified as another Piko of Wākea, another center of Wākea. The stars to the north is in the realm of Kane, another god. The stars to the south is the realm of Kanaloa, a different god. But in the middle, it's Wākea. So, we're looking at constellations that you recognize, through one worldview, but it's the same constellations, perhaps, that are viewed by other peoples around the world. And having a non-native name as its counterpart on a map wouldn't make it less traditional. Yeah, I think that's how I'd answer it.
Maybe time for one or two more questions, and then one back there.
I saw in the list of places the boat's been, Alaska was there, and I was wondering, A, how you got there, B, if you had any interaction with the Aboriginal peoples in Western Canada, like the Haida, and were there any modifications that needed to be made to the boat to sail in very northern waters?
Yeah, that was a cold one. But they sailed, so like I was saying, they built another canoe that was made out of logs that came from Alaska. So they sailed that canoe up through Alaska, through Canada, and to the Tlingit people, and was hosted, just as I was saying, we're hosted by all the different native peoples here on the East Coast. The same thing was like that on the West Coast, all the way up to Alaska with Haida. I'm pretty sure Athabascans, Tlinkits, and all along the Coast Salish people in Canada, all the way down to California. So yeah, wherever they went. There wasn't really any other modifications done to the canoe, just put on more layers of clothes, put on boots that you normally don't need in the Pacific by the equator where we are.
Okay, one last question.
Thank you. So you mentioned that you can't use the North Star south of the equator for your navigation. So I'm really curious what traditional techniques or what techniques you found most useful once you hit south of the equator.
Yeah, good question. So for example, the next leg I'm going on is, I'll be in Rapa Nui in a few weeks, actually. But because they're so far south, that would mean that, just thinking about it in this way, is that the south celestial pole is really high. So there's a whole bunch of stars that don't ever set, and they just rotate around this pole. But they're stars that we don't see in Hawaii, right? The south celestial pole is below the horizon in Hawaii. But there's lots of other stars that we can use that tell us direction and latitude that we can see in Hawaii. Majority of the stars, we still see it. But it's definitely a lot harder than being in the northern hemisphere, where if all you knew was one star and it was a clear night, you don't need to know any other stars, right? It's like looking at a compass. It only points north, and that's the compass. It's just in the sky. Just when you're down south, you got to use all these other different points of your compass to tell you what direction you're going. But yeah, like Orion, for example, you see that down there where we are, and you can use those stars and tell us where east and west is, and stars like that. I want to say a little bit more. It's like as we're traveling, for latitude-wise, and we're traveling from Hawaii to Tahiti, one way we tell we're in the latitude of Hawaii is a Southern Cross, which we call hanaya mālama, or neve is our names for them. When the distance from the top star to the bottom star is equal from the bottom star to the horizon, we know we're in the latitude of Hawaii. Can't see that here because we're so far north. But while we're in, the further south you are, the higher that constellation is. But we can use things like that tell us how where our latitude is, how far away from the equator we are, or away from home we are. So yeah, it's one of the best ways we tell latitude.
So I was told that there's an offer of a song of farewell.
Awesome.
Would you be willing to entertain that? So,
Mahalo.
Kaleo, for sharing your story.
Sure, just one more thing I want to say, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
If you guys are interested in hearing more about our voyage, you can go to our website, Hōkūleʻa.com. Or there's also a really excellent book written called Hawaii Rising that talks about the Hōkūleʻa and the Hawaiian Renaissance. And actually the author is here, right in the back. So Hawaii Rising if you're looking to learn more about it.
It's a great book.
Thanks for the pitch.
It's a great book.